Welcome to Twisted Truths, where betrayal meets brutal payback, and where the most unexpected twists expose what people are really capable of. This story isn't just shocking, it's personal. My name is Frank Callahan. I'm 38 now, living in a modest apartment in Seattle, far from the marble floors and crystal chandeliers of my childhood home in Connecticut. But back then, I was the heir to the Callahan legacy, groomed from birth to inherit a billion-dollar empire that I never asked for. Growing up as the eldest son of Warren Callahan, the ruthless CEO of Callahan Holdings, wasn't a life. It was a performance. One where I played the obedient son while my father barked orders like a general. I was expected to excel in everything: top schools, perfect grades, calculated charm. Failure? That was for others, not a Callahan. My mother, Judith, was beautiful, elegant, and heartbreakingly fragile. Her words were soft, her eyes always apologetic, as if she knew the prison my life had become but lacked the strength to help me escape it. Then there was my younger brother, Nathan. 7 years my junior and the golden child. While I was held to impossible standards, Nathan was given freedom, grace, and forgiveness. I envied him. And hated myself for that envy. For years, I tried to prove I was worthy. Ivy League graduate, company director by 27, working 80-hour weeks to grow Callahan Holdings' international footprint. But no matter what I achieved, it was never good enough for my father. Then came that fateful Thanksgiving night. The night that rewrote my life. The house was buzzing with guests, politicians, CEOs, investors, all sipping wine and laughing like hyenas in tuxedos. My father stood at the head of the table like a king surveying his court. Nathan sat across from me, smirking like always, and my mother, eyes downcast, barely touched her food. Then, during dessert, my father rose and raised his glass. "Ladies and gentlemen, I have an announcement," he declared, his voice slicing through the room. "To ensure the future of Callahan Holdings and strengthen ties with the governor's office, I am pleased to announce my son Frank's engagement to Miss Claudia Layton." The room burst into applause. I froze. Claudia? We'd spoken maybe twice. A daughter of political royalty. A perfect PR marriage. A merger disguised as love. I looked at my mother, her hands trembled. Nathan looked amused. And my father? He was staring at me like he'd just bought a new car and wanted everyone to admire it. I stood. My voice came out quieter than I intended, but firm. "No. I won't marry her." The room went silent. "What did you just say?" my father asked, slowly setting his wine down. I said no. "I'm not your bargaining chip." The slap didn't come with a hand, it came in the form of a wine glass. Full. Straight to my face. The cold sting of Merlot hit my eyes, my cheeks. My shirt was soaked in red, dripping to the floor like blood. Everyone gasped. "You don't deserve the Callahan name," he hissed. "Get out." And like that, I was erased. I didn't sleep that night. I walked for hours, the wine still soaking into my skin, the sting still fresh on my cheek, not from the alcohol, but from the humiliation. The image of my father, his fury smoldering behind cold blue eyes, replayed over and over like a curse I couldn't break. By morning, I returned to the apartment the company had provided me, the one I thought I owned. I stood in the shower for nearly an hour, watching the wine-stained water swirl down the drain. It should have felt like a cleansing, but it didn't. The shame clung to me like mold. I was still toweling off when the doorbell rang. A man in a suit stood at my door, expression blank, voice mechanical. "Mr. Callahan. You are hereby terminated from your position at Callahan Holdings. This apartment is company property. You have 24 hours to vacate." He handed me a thick envelope. Inside was the termination letter, a bank freeze notification, and a list of repossessions, my company credit cards, the Audi I drove, my office laptop, even the art on my apartment walls. All, company property. All gone. I laughed. Not because it was funny. But because it was so absurd. A day ago, I was an executive at a multi-billion-dollar firm. Now I was a man with no job, no savings, no place to live, and a red wine stain I couldn't wash out of my memory. The apartment felt suddenly unfamiliar, like I was squatting in a stranger's life. I packed what little I could call mine, a duffel bag of clothes, a box of old journals, and my personal laptop. Everything else? Gone. My phone buzzed with messages, but I ignored them. Eventually, I checked. My mother's text. Please apologize to your father. You embarrassed him. This can still be fixed. Nathan's text. Nice meltdown. I always knew you didn't have the spine to lead. And Claudia, the woman I was supposed to marry, she sent nothing at all. I moved into a rundown motel an hour outside the city. The carpet smelled of mildew, the walls were stained yellow with smoke, and the heat rattled like it was dying. I paid in cash for a week's stay, watching half of what was left in my personal bank account disappear. Days blurred together. I didn't shave. I barely ate. I stared at the ceiling, the cracked paint forming shapes like ghosts, reminding me of what I'd lost. Was this what freedom looked like? Or was this just the aftermath of setting fire to your own life? Some nights I'd walk for hours just to feel like I still existed. One night, I wandered into a dive bar off the highway and sat alone in a booth, nursing a cheap beer. An old man with a beard like wild moss asked if I was okay. Bad breakup, he asked, chuckling. Something like that, I muttered. He tapped his glass to mine. Well, kid, sometimes you gotta lose everything to see who you really are. I didn't believe him then. But I would. It took hitting bottom to finally hear the silence clearly. Without my father's voice dictating every move, without the company title inflating my ego, I was just Frank. And I didn't know what that meant. For a while, I tried applying for jobs. But every interview ended the same. Once they learned my last name, they either wanted gossip or shut the door on me. My father had made sure I was untouchable. No references. No leverage. No favors. I was radioactive. I pawned my watch, then my tailored suits. I traded fancy wine for instant coffee and expensive dinners for gas station sandwiches. One morning, I looked in the mirror and barely recognized myself. And yet, somewhere inside me, something flickered. I wasn't dead. Just buried. That's when I started writing. At first, it was just in my old journals, pages filled with anger, memories, rage, regret. But then it turned into ideas. Business ideas. I'd always had them, dozens of pitches my father had dismissed over the years. Too small. Too idealistic. Too beneath the Callahan name. But now. I had no name. Just ideas. And the tiniest ember of hunger in my chest. That's when I met Zoe. She worked at the front desk of the motel. A single mom with sharp wit and tired eyes, she noticed me scribbling in my journal one morning while I waited for the coffee machine to sputter out its last drop. "What are you writing?" she asked, nodding at my notebook. "Stuff no one would ever fund," I replied. She smiled. "You'd be surprised. Desperation makes great innovation." I laughed. But something about her words stuck. That night, I stayed up sketching out a startup idea I'd once pitched to Callahan Holdings and was told to shred, a platform to match underfunded farms with surplus produce to inner-city food banks. A blend of logistics, tech, and ethics. Zoe read it the next morning. She handed it back with a smirk. "You should build that." "With what money?" I asked. She shrugged. "Figure it out. If the idea's good enough, someone will listen." I didn't know it then, but that spark, that rough blueprint on paper, it would be the first brick on the road to my revenge. And redemption. I didn't believe in fate. But something about that third week at the motel felt like the universe was whispering at my door. Zoe, sharp-tongued, unfazed by status, kept encouraging me to chase the startup idea. "You've got nothing left to lose," she said one morning as she handed me a black coffee. "That's the best kind of freedom." She wasn't wrong. With no job, no money, and no future planned, I had one thing I hadn't had in decades: room to risk. I spent nights in that small motel room sketching out wireframes, researching logistics platforms, talking to food banks on forums, and emailing small urban farms posing as an undergrad doing market research. I called the idea Feastbridge. But even as that small spark grew brighter, I couldn't shake the heaviness. Not from losing my career or name, but from the silence. I hadn't heard a word from my mother. And for all the mocking texts Nathan sent in those first days, even he had gone quiet. And then, on a random Tuesday morning, it happened. Zoe knocked on my door with a wide-eyed look. "Frank," she said, holding out her phone. "You need to see this." It was a news headline. Callahan Holdings announces surprise engagement, Nathan Callahan to wed Claudia Layton. I dropped her phone. What? It felt like my lungs had collapsed. I sat down hard on the bed, the threadbare mattress creaking under the weight of what I was reading. There it was, Nathan, my younger brother, smiling in a designer suit next to Claudia Layton, the woman my father once tried to chain me to like a corporate puppet. Same venue. Same script. Different sun. The article called it a visionary union between two powerful families. A strategic engagement. Just like before. He gave my role to Nathan. I felt dizzy. He didn't just exile me. He replaced me. I kept reading, my eyes burning. Claudia's family, deeply rooted in politics, was pushing a new infrastructure bill, one that would directly benefit Callahan Holdings' bid for a multi-billion-dollar federal contract. The engagement wasn't love. It was leverage. Just like before. My father hadn't changed course. He simply changed sons. And Nathan? The article painted him as the golden boy, the future of the company. The Callahan heir apparent, they wrote. He was never supposed to be the heir. That was my entire life. My punishment wasn't just exile, it was erasure. But then came something that shook me deeper. I dug into the Callahan Holdings financial disclosures. They'd been forced to release limited documents due to an upcoming merger bid. I couldn't access everything, but I found enough in the footnotes to freeze me in place. Hidden in a line of legal language was a transfer made the day after Thanksgiving, a full severance package cancellation and asset clawback. Meaning, my shares, my stock options, my bonuses, gone. Not just paused. Legally voided. But that wasn't the worst part. There was another transfer. 1 week later. To Nathan Callahan. Purpose, emergency discretionary share allocation, heir transfer. Heir transfer. He didn't just get my seat at the table. He got my stock. My future. My life's work. My father didn't punish me. He replaced me, and gave everything I built to Nathan. My stomach twisted. But even beneath the rage, I felt something worse, betrayal. Nathan had texted me mockery after Thanksgiving. But he knew. He knew all along what Dad planned to do. And he took it. He stood in that same house, watched our father smear my name and steal my legacy, and he played along. That's when something inside me shifted. I had spent my life trying to please my father. Now, I would take everything back, and I'd do it in a way they'd never see coming. The moment I saw the words, heir transfer, the grief I'd been drowning in, evaporated. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I planned. Because now I wasn't just a man who had lost everything. I was a man who had been stolen from, and I had the receipts. But revenge wasn't about tantrums. My father had trained me to play chess in boardrooms since I was 12. Now I was going to use every lesson he taught me to destroy him. Only this time, I wouldn't fight him in his world, I'd build my own. And so I doubled down on Feast Bridge. Zoe helped me create a basic pitch deck. I reached out to every contact I still had in the industry, disguising my name in email aliases, using burner Zoom accounts. Some slammed the door in my face. But a few remembered the old Frank Callahan. One was a retired investor named Greg Levitt. He'd worked with my father years ago before they had a falling out over ethics, a story my father always sneered at. I sent Greg a pitch anonymously. To my surprise, he agreed to a call. When we finally met in a dingy cafe off I-84, I told him who I really was. I'm Frank Callahan. And I'm not here asking for a handout, I'm here to fund a company that will ruin everything my father built. Greg raised an eyebrow but didn't walk away. He sipped his coffee slowly and said, "Tell me more." I laid it all out, how FeastBridge would disrupt corporate logistics, cut government food waste, and undercut the overpriced delivery contracts that companies like Callahan Holdings use to squeeze millions out of federal programs. We would start small, city-to-farm networks, but scale fast with smart routing and automation. Greg didn't smile. But when I finished, he reached into his jacket and pulled out a pen. "You get one shot," he said. "I'm in for $250,000. That $250,000. It became our seed. I moved out of the motel. Zoe quit the front desk and joined me as our head of partnerships. I hired 2 developers, freelancers who had also been screwed by big firms. We set up shop in a 2-room office over a bookstore in a sleepy part of town. And I began working 18-hour days. But the money? It wasn't just about launching the business. I had something bigger in mind. Greg had whispered something during one of our late-night calls, "You know your father's buying up small agri-tech companies, right?" I blinked. Why? Because he's scared. Scared someone's going to beat him to the USDA contract in the new infrastructure bill. And then it hit me. The same contract Nathan and Claudia's political marriage was designed to secure. So I did something bold. I created 3 shell companies under fake names. Through these shells, I quietly bought up every agri-tech startup in his path, even ones not yet public. Some were a few engineers and a dream. Others were failing, desperate for cash. I acquired them fast. And without realizing it, my father began bidding against me in his own war. While he used billion-dollar meetings and backdoor political favors, I used street-level speed and digital guerrilla tactics. And it was working. His proposed merger. Slowing down. His confidence. Eroding. But I needed something else, something more personal. Nathan. He was the pawn that replaced me. So I started watching him. I had an old friend, Drew, who worked in media and still owed me a favor. I asked him to dig into Nathan's sudden rise. "Off the record," I said. No trail back to me. 2 weeks later, Drew sent me a secure file. I stared at my screen as the contents loaded. Invoices. Wire transfers. Emails. Claudia's father, Governor Layton, had been funneling state money into a dummy nonprofit. That nonprofit had turned around and hired Nathan as a consultant at $95,000 a month. For doing nothing. It was bribery disguised as employment. Nathan had gone from golden boy to silent accomplice in one of the most predictable but devastating political scandals possible. Now I had 2 grenades in my pocket. 1, a rapidly growing startup aimed directly at my father's core contracts. 2, proof that Nathan and Claudia's marriage wasn't just fake, it was illegal. But I wasn't ready to go nuclear yet. No. I wanted the timing to be perfect. Timing. That was everything. If I moved too soon, they'd recover. If I waited too long, they might solidify the merger and become untouchable. So I hit the first domino with surgical precision. It began with a press leak. I sent the shell company acquisition documents, proof that FeastBridge was quietly buying up the same agri-tech startups Callahan Holdings was pursuing, to a journalist at TechForge Weekly. A mid-level publication, but respected in startup circles. 3 days later, the headline dropped. Anonymous startup disrupts Callahan Holdings' federal bid, is the empire crumbling? Within hours, the internet lit up. Whispers spread. Investors got nervous. And more importantly, federal agencies started asking questions. Suddenly, my father had a problem he couldn't bully into submission. Then I struck again. I scheduled a low-profile launch for FeastBridge's beta platform, a public pilot in 4 urban markets connecting local farms directly with schools and food banks. Zoe coordinated logistics. Our devs worked miracles. The launch was clean, fast, and better than expected. But I wasn't done. I called in my second favor from Drew. We packaged the pilot program's early success and fed it to 2 national news outlets, Wired and Fast Company, highlighting how FeastBridge was saving government money while feeding underserved communities. The next headline. Ex-Callahan executive's new startup threatens billion-dollar federal pipeline. For the first time in my life, I smiled not in triumph, but in justice. I waited for the phone call. And sure enough, it came. Unknown number. A number I hadn't seen in nearly a year. I answered. Hello. My father's voice growled on the other end, sharp and icy. What do you think you're doing, Frank? I stayed silent. Do you have any idea the damage you're causing? Still silent. You were nothing without me. I gave you everything. That's when I laughed. Quietly. Coldly. No, Dad. You gave me chains. I built everything myself the moment you let go of the leash. The line went dead. I knew what he'd do next. He'd send lawyers. And I was ready. I had structured FeastBridge airtight. My name wasn't on any legal documents until the public beta launched. I had NDAs signed, layers of legal shielding, and a small army of pro bono lawyers thanks to Greg Levitt's network of anti-corporate allies. But what I wasn't ready for, was what Nathan did next. He went to the press. A last-ditch PR campaign. A photo op with Claudia in a soup kitchen. A statement about Callahan Holdings' long-term investment in community food systems. But the public didn't buy it. Especially after the next bombshell. I leaked the wire transfers. $95,000 per month, consulting, fees to Nathan Callahan from a shady nonprofit tied to Claudia's father. This time, I didn't go to TechForge. I went to the New York Times. Front page, national scandal. Governor Layton accused of pay-to-play scheme, Callahan family tied to financial corruption. The fallout was immediate. Nathan's photo, once glowing in magazines, was now plastered across television screens beneath the words, fraud, nepotism, and, investigation pending. Callahan Holdings stock plummeted overnight. The merger deal. Frozen. The infrastructure contract. Pulled for federal review. My father's empire. Bleeding. And yet. I wasn't done. Because the final blow had to come from the one person he never expected. My mother. I hadn't spoken to my mother in over a year. Not since that night. The night I stood drenched in red wine, humiliated in front of the entire Callahan dynasty, and she, stayed seated. Silent. Eyes down. Hands trembling, but unmoving. Part of me hated her for that silence. Another part still hoped, foolishly, that she'd pick up the phone someday and say, "I'm sorry." That call never came. Until one afternoon, 2 weeks after the New York Times article exploded. Zoe and I were in the office late, finalizing an expansion roadmap, when my phone lit up with an old contact, Judith. I stared at it for a long time. Answer it, Zoe said gently. I did. Her voice was quiet. Measured. But not weak. Frank, she said. I read everything. The articles. The platform. Your company. What you've done. I didn't say a word. She continued, you were right to walk away. And I was wrong to stay silent. Still, I said nothing. My hands were clenched. I want to meet you, she said, softly. But more than that. I need to give you something. We met in a small tea room in Stamford. Neutral ground. She looked different. Thinner. Hair grayer than I remembered. But her eyes, blue-gray like mine, held something I'd never seen before, resolve. I need to tell you something about the company, she said. About the trust. I blinked. What trust? She pulled out a folder and slid it across the table. It was a copy of an old legal agreement, dated 2 years after I graduated from college. My father's signature. Hers. And mine. It was a trust agreement, one that I had signed without reading, thinking it was part of my employment onboarding back then. This document made you the controlling heir of the Callahan Trust, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Your father told you it was a tax document. But legally, it gave you 51% of the family's internal holding shares, not the public stock, but the private voting shares. I felt my heart stop. What? I said. That can't be. It was meant to protect you, she said. Back then, I convinced him to secure the family's long-term interests in case anything happened. You were supposed to inherit it when you turned 40. But when you defied him, he thought he could bury it. I shook my head, stunned. And Nathan? He doesn't know, she said. No one does. Your father buried it in a vault of legal distractions. But I kept my copy. My pulse thundered. If what she said was true. I wasn't just the son he cast aside. I still owned the company. Not the public stock. Not the title. But the voting power embedded in the trust that governed Callahan Holdings' internal operations, power that had never been revoked. Because it couldn't be. It was irrevocable. He thought he'd replaced me. But he'd only delayed the storm. I want you to use it, she said. Burn it all down if you have to. I can't watch him destroy both my sons. My throat tightened. In that moment, I saw her not as the woman who once stayed quiet, but as the woman who had quietly waited for the moment to strike. Maybe she hadn't failed me. Maybe she had simply survived him. I took the folder with shaking hands. This changed everything. And I knew exactly what to do next. I walked into the Callahan Holdings boardroom one last time. The building hadn't changed. Still cold, modern, sterile, the same glass and chrome fortress I'd once called home. But I wasn't the same man who had been thrown out drenched in wine and shame. This time, I came not with fear in my veins, but with fire. The assistant at the front desk nearly dropped her tablet when she saw me. I gave her a polite nod and walked straight past security, because legally, as 51% trustee of the Callahan family holdings, I was security. The emergency board meeting had been called to restructure leadership in the wake of the PR scandals and collapsing contracts. They were scrambling. Nathan sat at the head of the table, pale and fraying, his tie slightly crooked. My father sat beside him, his hair thinner, his skin grayer, but his eyes still burning with that same controlling fire. He saw me. And froze. What the hell is he doing here? He barked, standing up. I dropped the trust agreement on the table. A quiet thud. Followed by silence. The board members looked confused, then curious, then stunned as I slid copies of the original signed document down the table. My voice was calm. This, I said, is the irrevocable agreement granting me controlling vote over the Callahan family trust, signed by both of you, and notarized in 2011. One board member adjusted his glasses, reading quickly. This is valid. This overrides Nathan's temporary appointment. I turned to my father. You didn't strip me of power, Dad. You just forgot to read the fine print. Funny, considering that's what you always told me to do. His face turned red, then white. You little bastard, he whispered. No, I said, locking eyes with him. You're the bastard who used your own sons like chess pieces. I just became the player. Nathan stood, panicked. Frank, wait, please. I didn't know. He told me it was all legal. That you forfeited everything. I cut him off. You signed contracts, Nathan. Took the money. Smiled for the cameras. You didn't just play along. You enjoyed the spotlight while I starved. His shoulders sagged. For once, he looked like the younger brother I used to protect, not the polished puppet I watched replace me. The boardroom was quiet as I leaned forward. As of today, I continued, I'm exercising my authority as trustee to call for a vote. Motion, immediate removal of Warren Callahan as CEO. Pending audit. Pending federal investigation. Gasps. My father stood, slamming his fist into the table. You're destroying this company. No, I said. You already did. The vote was swift. Unanimous. He was out. I turned to the legal counsel. Submit findings to the federal investigators this afternoon. Cooperate fully. And be clear, Callahan Holdings is under new management. I walked out without another word. Outside, the sky was gray, the wind cold. But I'd never felt warmer in my life. Nathan called me a few days later. He wasn't angry. Just tired. I deserve it, he said. You let him make you into a shadow, I told him. Now it's on you to find the light. He paused. You know, I used to think you were the one trapped. But you were always the one trying to escape. I didn't reply. I didn't need to. Some bridges don't need to be burned. Just left behind. Feast Bridge went on to receive national funding. We scaled into 12 cities, then 20. Zoe became my COO. Greg sat on the advisory board. One night, we toasted with cheap whiskey in our small office. She looked at me and said, feels like it's just the beginning, huh? I nodded. Because it was. My mother never returned to the mansion. She moved to a small cottage in Vermont, where she paints now, sends me photos of lakes and trees. Sometimes she calls. Sometimes she just sends a card that says, proud of you. Love, Mom. That's enough. As for my father, he lives in silence now. His name disgraced. The empire he tried to preserve with chains and wine now controlled by the son he cast aside. Poetic. I didn't destroy him with rage. I beat him with the very thing he worshipped most, power. But I used mine, to walk away. In the end, truth has a way of surfacing, even if it comes twisted through pain and betrayal. As one wise voice once said, sometimes your greatest enemy was once your closest ally. If this story struck a chord with you, let us know in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe, share, and spread the word, because justice deserves to be heard.